A struggling mother parts with the last symbol of her past, a wedding ring to feed her kids. Little did she know this act of desperation would lead to an unexpected confrontation with her billionaire ex-husband. Hey guys, before we begin, we kindly request you to hit the subscribe and like button. It really helps us bring you these beautiful daily stories. Let's continue. The rain poured relentlessly that evening, drenching the streets and casting a somber mood over the bustling city. Inside a modest apartment on the outskirts of town, Sarah Taylor sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the object in her hand. It glinted faintly in the dim light, a delicate gold band adorned with a single modest diamond, her wedding ring. Once a symbol of everlasting love and commitment, it now felt like an unbearable weight tied to a chapter of her life she had long tried to leave behind. Sarah's two children, Emma and Jake, were playing quietly in the corner of the room, their laughter a faint melody in the background. They were too young to understand the depth of their mother's struggles, but old enough to sense the tension in her weary smile and tired eyes. Dinner that evening had been sparse, a few slices of bread and a can of soup shared among the three of them. Sarah's heart ached as she thought about the empty fridge and the bills piling up on the kitchen counter. This wasn't the life she had envisioned when she'd married Ethan Carter, the charismatic and ambitious man who had swept her off her feet nearly a decade ago. Back then, their love had been a whirlwind of passion and promises. Ethan had always been driven, his sights set on building an empire. As his career skyrocketed and he became the billionaire CEO of Carter Industries, their relationship began to crumble under the weight of his ambition. Late nights at the office turned into missed birthdays and anniversaries. Eventually, the love that had once bound them together seemed to evaporate, leaving Sarah to pick up the pieces of a broken marriage. When the divorce papers were finalized, Sarah had walked away with full custody of their children, refusing Ethan's generous financial settlement. She had always been proud and independent, determined to provide for her kids without relying on her ex-husband's wealth. But now, as she sat in her dimly lit bedroom, the weight of that decision felt suffocating. Her gaze shifted to Emma and Jake. They were her world, her reason for pushing through each day despite the mounting challenges. Emma, with her bright smile and endless questions about the world, and Jake, who idolized his big sister and clung to Sarah like a lifeline. They deserved more than she could give them right now. And so, with a heavy heart, Sarah slipped the wedding ring into her purse and made up her mind. The next morning, Sarah walked into a local pawn shop, clutching the ring tightly in her hand. The shop was dimly lit, its shelves filled with a motley assortment of items, guitars, electronics, jewelry, and trinkets that had all once meant something to someone. The air smelled faintly of metal and dust, and the faint hum of an old radio played in the background. The pawnbroker, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, greeted her with a nod. "What can I do for you?" he asked, his voice gentle. Sarah hesitated for a moment before placing the ring on the counter. "I'd like to sell this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man picked up the ring, examining it closely under the light. "It's a beautiful piece," he said. "Are you sure you want to part with it?" Sarah nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "It's just a ring," she said, though the words felt hollow. The pawnbroker named a price and Sarah accepted without hesitation. It wasn't much, barely enough to cover groceries for the next week, but it was something. As she walked out of the shop with a small stack of cash in her hand, she felt a mix of relief and despair. She had done what she needed to do for her children, but the act of selling the ring felt like a final severing of ties to a life she had once cherished. That evening, as Sarah prepared a simple but hearty meal for Emma and Jake, she resolved to keep moving forward. She had made sacrifices before, and would do so again if it meant giving her children a chance at a better future. What she didn't know was that her decision to sell the ring would set off a chain of events that would bring her face to face with her past in ways she could never have imagined. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan's opulent office, casting long shadows on the polished mahogany desk. It was a space that exuded power and authority, much like the man who occupied it. Ethan Carter, the billionaire CEO known for his sharp instincts and unwavering resolve, was immersed in reviewing quarterly financial reports when his assistant, Clara, knocked on the door. "Come in," Ethan called, not looking up from the document in his hands. Clara stepped in hesitantly, holding an envelope. "Sir, this was delivered for you. It's marked urgent." Ethan glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the reports. Leave it on the desk. Clara placed the envelope down and lingered for a moment, her lips pressed together as though she wanted to say something. Ethan noticed and raised an eyebrow. Anything else? It's from a pawn shop, she said softly, her tone laced with hesitation. The mention of a pawn shop made Ethan look up sharply. He reached for the envelope, his curiosity piqued. Tearing it open, he found a receipt inside. It listed an item sold, a platinum wedding ring, and bore the signature of the seller, Mia Carter. His breath hitched. The name on the receipt sent a jolt through him, as if the past he had worked so hard to bury had suddenly clawed its way back to the surface. Mia, his ex-wife, the woman he had once loved deeply and let slip through his fingers. Clara shifted uneasily. I thought you'd want to know. Who brought this? Ethan demanded, his tone more curt than he intended. A courier, Clara replied. But I can make inquiries if you'd like. Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. Do that. As Clara exited the office, Ethan leaned back in his chair, gripping the receipt as if it were a lifeline. He stared at the words printed on the paper, his mind reeling with questions. Why had Mia sold the ring? And why now, after all this time? His thoughts spiraled back to the last time he had seen her. Their marriage had ended in a storm of arguments and misunderstandings, their once passionate love eroded by his relentless ambition and her quiet frustration. He had been consumed by his work, blind to her growing unhappiness until it was too late. When she had walked out, she had taken nothing but her dignity and their 2 children, leaving behind the life of luxury he had thought would make her happy. Ethan clenched his fists, a pang of guilt searing through him. He had always assumed Mia would be fine, that her strength and resilience would see her through. But the fact that she had sold her wedding ring, a symbol of their failed marriage and perhaps her last tie to him, told a different story. He couldn't sit idly by. Determined to find out the truth, Ethan grabbed his coat and left the office, instructing Clara to reschedule his meetings. The address on the receipt was clear, and he intended to go straight to the pawn shop. He needed answers. The pawn shop was a small, dimly lit establishment, nestled between a laundromat and a diner in a less affluent part of town. The bell above the door jingled as Ethan entered, the sound jarring in the otherwise quiet space. The shop was cluttered with an assortment of items, watches, electronics, jewelry, all bearing the silent stories of desperation or excess. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, looked up from behind the counter. Can I help you? Ethan approached, holding up the receipt. This was brought to my attention. I need to know who sold this ring. The shopkeeper studied him warily. We don't usually disclose that kind of information. Ethan's expression hardened. I'm not asking for usual. The woman who sold this is someone I know. Please, this is important. The sincerity in Ethan's tone seemed to sway the man. He sighed and gestured toward a notebook. She didn't give many details, just said she needed the money for her kids. Looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Ethan's stomach churned. The thought of Mia in such a state was unbearable. Did she say where she was staying? The shopkeeper shook his head. No, but she mentioned a shelter nearby. Without another word, Ethan left the shop, the receipt still clutched in his hand. His mind raced as he drove to the address the shopkeeper had provided. The thought of Mia and his children in a shelter filled him with a mixture of dread and determination. How had it come to this? And what could he do to fix it? As Ethan pulled up to the shelter, his heart pounded in his chest. The modest building was a far cry from the world of opulence he was accustomed to. Children played in a small, fenced-in yard while volunteers moved in and out, carrying supplies and offering smiles to the residents. He stepped out of his car, his designer shoes crunching against the gravel. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a pang of insecurity. He wasn't here as the billionaire CEO or the man who could solve problems with a flick of his pen. He was here as a father, as an ex-husband, as someone who had failed the people he cared about most. Ethan approached the entrance, his stride purposeful yet hesitant. He wasn't sure what he would say to Mia when he saw her, but one thing was certain. He wouldn't leave until he had a chance to make things right. Ethan stepped into the shelter, his polished shoes contrasting sharply with the scuffed floors. The air smelled faintly of cleaning products and faintly of soup, a far cry from the high-end offices and penthouses he usually frequented. The chatter of children and the hum of activity filled the space as volunteers and residents moved about their routines. Ethan felt out of place but pressed on, his resolve unwavering. A woman in her late 40s with a warm smile approached him. She wore a name tag that read, Rachel, Shelter Coordinator. "Good afternoon, how can I help you?" she asked, her tone friendly but cautious. "I'm looking for someone," Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "Mia Carter. I was told she might be staying here." Rachel's smile faltered and her eyes narrowed slightly as she assessed him. "May I ask who's looking for her?" "I'm her ex-husband," Ethan admitted, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "I just found out about her situation, and I need to see her." Rachel hesitated, her gaze softening as she studied him. "Mia's been through a lot. I hope you're here to help, not to cause more pain." "I want to help," Ethan said earnestly. "Please, just tell me where she is." Rachel nodded reluctantly and gestured toward a door at the far end of the hall. "She's in the playroom with her kids, but I'm warning you, be gentle. She's had to be strong for a long time." Ethan nodded his thanks and made his way toward the room. His heart pounded with each step, a mixture of anxiety and guilt tightening his chest. What would he say to her? How would she react? He had rehearsed 100 conversations in his head, but now, standing at the threshold of the room where Mia was, he felt utterly unprepared. He paused at the door, peering through the small window. Inside, a group of children played with toys, their laughter filling the air. Among them was Mia, kneeling on the floor as she helped a little boy stack blocks into a wobbly tower. Her once shiny brown hair was tied back into a loose ponytail, and her face bore signs of exhaustion, dark circles under her eyes, a pallor that spoke of sleepless nights and skipped meals. But her smile, directed at the boy, was genuine and filled with warmth. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It had been years since he'd seen her, and the sight of her now was both heartbreaking and humbling. This was the woman he had once vowed to love and protect, reduced to selling her wedding ring to keep their children fed. The boy, a spitting image of Ethan with his dark hair and bright blue eyes, looked up and spotted him through the window. He froze, his small face lighting up with recognition. "Mommy, look!" he called, pointing toward the door. Mia turned, her smile fading as her gaze landed on Ethan. For a moment, the room seemed to freeze. The laughter of the children faded into the background as their eyes locked, a million unspoken words hanging in the air. Ethan stepped into the room, his movements hesitant. "Mia," he said softly, his voice carrying a mix of emotion. "It's been a long time." Mia rose slowly, her expression unreadable. "Ethan," she said, her tone guarded. "What are you doing here?" "I found out," he faltered, holding up the pawn shop receipt as if it explained everything. "I found out about the ring, about everything. I had no idea." "You had no idea because you didn't care to know," Mia interrupted, her voice sharp. Her eyes burned with a mix of anger and hurt. "You walked away, Ethan. You left us behind. Why are you here now?" Her words hit him like a physical blow, and for a moment he was speechless. She was right. He had walked away, consumed by his ambition and convinced that his financial support was enough. But seeing her now, standing strong despite everything, he realized just how much he had failed her. "I was wrong," Ethan admitted, his voice low. "I thought I was doing the right thing by giving you space, by sending money and assuming that was enough. But I see now that I failed you, and the kids." Mia crossed her arms, her posture defensive. "So what? You came here to apologize? To ease your guilt?" "I came here to help," Ethan said firmly. "To fix what I broke, if that's even possible." Her eyes softened slightly, but her tone remained skeptical. "Help how, Ethan? You can't just throw money at this and expect everything to be fine." "I don't want to just throw money at it," Ethan said, stepping closer. "I want to be here. For you. For the kids. I want to make things right." Mia's shoulders sagged, the weight of her struggles evident in her posture. "It's not that simple," she said quietly. "You can't undo the past." "I know," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "But I can try to build a better future. Please, Mia, let me try." For a long moment, Mia studied him, her expression conflicted. Finally, she sighed and nodded toward the children. "If you really want to help, start with them. They've missed you more than you know." Ethan's gaze shifted to the two children playing nearby, the boy who had called out to him and a younger girl with Mia's brown hair and big, curious eyes. They were his children, his flesh and blood, and he had missed so much of their lives. He knelt down, opening his arms hesitantly. "Hi, buddy," he said to the boy. "I'm your dad." The boy hesitated for a moment before running into his arms, burying his face in Ethan's chest. Ethan held him tightly, tears stinging his eyes. "I've missed you," he whispered. The little girl approached cautiously, clutching a stuffed animal. "Are you my daddy too?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded, his heart breaking at her uncertainty. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm your daddy." She stepped closer, and when he reached out, she allowed him to scoop her into his arms. Holding his children for the first time in years, Ethan felt a swell of emotions: regret, love, and a fierce determination to never let them down again. Mia watched the scene silently, her arms crossed and her expression guarded. She wanted to believe Ethan's intentions were genuine, but trust was something he would have to earn. For now, she would let him try, for the sake of their children and the faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could be the man she once believed him to be. Ethan spent the following days immersing himself in Mia's world, a world he had been absent from for far too long. The shelter, with its modest rooms and humble meals, was a stark contrast to the luxurious penthouses and private jets that had defined his life. But, as he watched the resilience of its residents and the tireless work of the volunteers, he felt a growing respect for the strength it took to endure such hardship. Mia remained wary of his intentions. While she allowed him to spend time with the children, she kept her distance, her guard firmly in place. Ethan didn't push her. He understood that earning her trust would take more than words. It required action, consistency, and a willingness to meet her on her terms. One evening, after the children had fallen asleep, Ethan approached Mia in the small communal kitchen. She was washing dishes, her hands moving methodically as the faucet gushed over the soapy plates. For a moment he simply watched her, taking in the quiet determination that had always defined her. "Mia," he said softly, breaking the silence. She glanced over her shoulder, her expression neutral. "What is it, Ethan?" "I've been thinking about how I can help," he began. "Not just for the kids, but for you, and for this place. You shouldn't have to do all of this alone." Mia set the plate down, drying her hands on a dish towel. "And what exactly do you think you can do, Ethan? Write a big check and walk away again?" "No," he said firmly. "I'm not walking away this time. I want to do more than just throw money at the problem. I want to be involved." Her brows furrowed in skepticism. "Involved how?" Ethan took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "This shelter is doing incredible work, but it's clear that resources are stretched thin. I want to help expand it, create a space where families can not only survive but thrive. Better facilities, more staff, job training programs, things that can make a real difference." Mia stared at him, her expression unreadable. "And why now? Why do you suddenly care about this place when you didn't before?" He met her gaze, his voice filled with emotion. "Because I didn't see it before, Mia. I didn't understand what you were going through, what you've had to sacrifice. But now that I do, I can't just stand by and do nothing." Mia crossed her arms, her posture defensive. "This isn't just about the shelter, Ethan. It's about the kids. They've been hurt by your absence, and so have I. If you want to help, you need to start with us." Ethan nodded, her words striking a chord. "You're right. I know I've failed you, and them, but I want to make it right, Mia. I don't expect forgiveness overnight, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn it." She studied him for a long moment, the tension between them palpable. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "If you're serious about this, Ethan, it's going to take more than a few grand gestures. You need to show up every day, not just for the shelter, but for your kids. They deserve that." "I will," he promised, "every single day." Mia nodded, though the skepticism in her eyes remained. "We'll see." The next morning, Ethan arrived early at the shelter, determined to make good on his promise. He started small, helping with chores, organizing supplies, and spending as much time as he could with the children. His presence didn't go unnoticed. The shelter staff and residents were initially wary of the billionaire in their midst, but as the days turned into weeks, they began to see the sincerity behind his efforts. Ethan also took the first steps toward realizing his vision for the shelter. He hired contractors to assess the building's needs, consulted with nonprofit organizations to develop sustainable programs, and even leveraged his corporate connections to secure donations. But he made a point to involve Mia in every decision, seeking her input and respecting her experience. Mia, despite her reservations, couldn't help but notice the changes in Ethan. He was no longer the distant, work-obsessed man she had once married. He listened more, cared more, and seemed genuinely invested in their lives. Slowly, her walls began to crack, though she remained cautious about letting him in completely. One evening, as they sat together in the shelter's small lounge, Ethan turned to Mia with a question that had been weighing on his mind. "Mia," he said hesitantly, "why didn't you tell me how bad things had gotten?" She looked at him, her expression a mixture of sadness and frustration. "Because I didn't think you'd care, Ethan. You were so focused on your work, on your success, that there was no room for us in your life." He flinched at her words but didn't argue. "I was wrong," he admitted. "I thought providing financially was enough, but I see now that it wasn't. I let you down, Mia, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." Mia's gaze softened, though the pain in her eyes remained. "You can't change the past, Ethan, but maybe you can make a difference now." Her words were a small opening, a glimmer of hope that he clung to. "I will," he said earnestly. "For you, for the kids, and for this place." As they sat together in the quiet room, the distance between them felt a little less insurmountable. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he was on the path to redemption. Ethan's journey to repair his relationship with his children was anything but simple. Sophia and Max, though young, carried the weight of his absence in ways that broke his heart. Their initial interactions were awkward, punctuated by moments of silence and guarded glances, but Ethan was determined to bridge the gap, even if it meant starting from scratch. One Saturday morning, Ethan arrived at the shelter with a sense of nervous anticipation. He had planned a day out for the three of them, a trip to the local park, followed by ice cream at their favorite spot. It was a small gesture, but one he hoped would begin to rebuild the bond they had lost. "Do we have to go?" Sophia asked, her arms crossed as she stood beside Mia. Ethan knelt to her level, his gaze steady but gentle. "I know things haven't been easy, Sophia, and I know I've made a lot of mistakes, but I want to spend time with you and Max to make things right. Will you give me a chance?" Sophia hesitated, glancing at Max, who was clutching his mother's hand. Finally, she sighed. "Fine, but no boring stuff." Ethan smiled, relief washing over him. "No boring stuff. I promise." At the park, Ethan threw himself into the role of doting father. He pushed Max on the swings, cheered as Sophia raced down the slides, and even joined them in a game of tag. For the first time, laughter replaced the tension that had lingered between them. It was a glimpse of what could be, a future where they could heal as a family. As they sat on a bench eating ice cream, Max turned to Ethan with a curious expression. "Why weren't you here before, Daddy?" The question hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I thought I was doing the right thing by working hard to give you and Mommy everything you needed, but I was wrong. I wasn't there when it mattered most, and I'm so sorry for that." Max frowned, his small face serious. "Will you stay now?" Ethan reached out, placing a gentle hand on Max's shoulder. "I will, buddy. I'm not going anywhere." Sophia, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "You really hurt Mommy, you know." "I know," Ethan said, his voice heavy with regret. "And I'm trying to make it up to her, and to both of you. It's going to take time, but I promise I'll keep trying." Sophia studied him for a moment before nodding. "Okay, but you have to keep your promises." "I will," Ethan vowed. Over the next few weeks, Ethan's commitment to his children became evident. He made time for them every day, whether it was helping with homework, reading bedtime stories, or simply listening to their thoughts and feelings. Slowly but surely, their trust in him began to grow. One evening, as he tucked Max into bed, the little boy reached out and hugged him tightly. "I missed you, Daddy," Max whispered. Ethan's throat tightened, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "I missed you too, Max, more than you'll ever know." Sophia, too, began to warm to him, though her guardedness lingered. She started sharing small details about her day, asking for his help with school projects, and even laughing at his jokes. Each moment felt like a victory, a step closer to the family he had nearly lost. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. There were days when the past loomed large, when the pain of his absence resurfaced in unexpected ways. Yet Ethan refused to give up. He knew that rebuilding trust wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up day after day with love and sincerity. One evening, as the family sat together in the shelter's common room, Sophia turned to Ethan with a serious expression. "Are you going to leave again?" Ethan met her gaze, his heart aching at the fear in her voice. No, Sophia. I'm here to stay. For you, for Max, and for Mommy. I promise. Sophia nodded slowly, her eyes softening. Okay. It was a simple word, but it carried the weight of her trust. A trust Ethan was determined to honor. In that moment, he realized that while he couldn't change the past, he had the power to shape their future. And he would do everything in his power to make it a future filled with love, stability, and the promise of brighter days ahead. As Ethan grew closer to Sophia and Max, his focus shifted to rebuilding trust with Mia. Though she allowed him to spend time with the children, she remained cautious, her guard firmly in place. The wounds of the past were still fresh, and Mia wasn't ready to let him back into her heart. One evening, as the children slept, Ethan found Mia sitting on the shelter's balcony, her arms wrapped around herself as she gazed out at the city lights. He hesitated for a moment before stepping outside, holding 2 mugs of tea. "Mind if I join you?" he asked softly. Mia glanced at him but didn't object, so he sat down beside her, placing one of the mugs on the small table between them. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken words. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to talk to," Ethan began, his voice low. "But I wanted to thank you for letting me spend time with Sophia and Max. It means more to me than I can put into words." Mia sighed, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "They deserve to know their father. That's the only reason I agreed." "I understand," Ethan said, "and I know I have a long way to go before you can trust me again. But I want you to know that I'm here. For them. For you." Mia turned to him, her eyes weary but searching. "Why now, Ethan? Why come back after all this time? Do you have any idea what it was like, trying to hold everything together on my own?" "I can't imagine," Ethan admitted, his voice thick with regret. "And I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I was selfish, Mia. I thought I was doing what was best by focusing on work, but all I did was hurt the people I love most." Mia looked away, her jaw tightening. "You don't get to fix this with a few apologies and some time at the park. It's not that simple." "I know it's not," Ethan said earnestly, "and I don't expect forgiveness overnight. I just want a chance to prove that I've changed, that I'm not the man who walked away." Mia's heart ached at his words, but she wasn't ready to let go of her anger and pain. "Words are easy, Ethan. Promises are easy. But actions, those are what matter." "I agree," Ethan said. "That's why I've been taking steps to make real changes. Not just for our family, but for myself. I've started therapy, trying to understand why I made the choices I did. And I've cut back at work so I can be more present. I know it's not enough yet, but I'm committed to doing whatever it takes." Mia was silent, her emotions a whirlwind. She wanted to believe him, but the memories of his absence and the struggles she endured alone made it difficult. "You hurt me, Ethan," she said finally, her voice trembling. "You hurt all of us, and I don't know if I can ever forget that." "I don't expect you to forget," Ethan said gently. "I just hope in time you can forgive. Not for me, but for yourself, for Sophia and Max. They deserve to see their parents working together, even if it's not as a couple." Mia's eyes filled with tears and she quickly wiped them away. "It's not that simple." "I know," Ethan said. "But I'm here for the long haul, Mia. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'll keep showing up. I'll keep proving to you and the kids that I'm here to stay." Mia looked at him, searching for any sign of insincerity. But all she saw was a man stripped of pretense, genuinely trying to make amends. "I'll think about it," she said softly, her voice barely audible. Ethan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "That's all I can ask for." Over the next few weeks, Ethan continued to respect Mia's boundaries while finding small ways to support her. He volunteered at the shelter, helped with chores, and spent quality time with the kids. His actions were quiet but consistent, slowly chipping away at Mia's walls. One day, as they worked together to organize donated clothing, Mia caught herself laughing at one of Ethan's jokes. The sound startled her, a reminder of the rare moments of happiness they'd shared during their marriage. "You're still the same goofball," she said, shaking her head. "And you're still the strongest person I know," Ethan replied, his tone warm. Mia's smile faded, replaced by a wistful expression. "I had to be." "I know," Ethan said, his gaze steady. "And I'm sorry I wasn't there to share that weight." Mia's heart softened at his words, though she remained cautious. Forgiveness wouldn't come easily, but for the first time, She allowed herself to entertain the possibility that they could rebuild something, if not as a couple, then as co-parents and partners in raising their children. As they finished their task, Ethan turned to her with a tentative smile. "Would you like to grab a coffee sometime, just to talk?" Mia hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe, we'll see." It wasn't a definitive answer, but it was a step, and for Ethan that was enough to keep going. He knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain, but he was determined to walk it, one step at a time, with hope in his heart, and a commitment to the family he had almost lost. The days turned into weeks, and while Mia's guarded demeanor persisted, there were moments where the tension between her and Ethan softened. Their interactions, once strained, began to carry a tentative ease, though the pain of the past still lingered. For Ethan, every shared moment was an opportunity to prove he was committed to change, and for Mia, every kind gesture or act of patience chipped away at her walls. One rainy afternoon, Mia was in the kitchen of the shelter, preparing a simple lunch for the children. The rhythmic sound of rain against the windows provided a comforting backdrop as she chopped vegetables, her mind preoccupied with the endless tasks of managing the shelter and raising Sophia and Max. Ethan appeared in the doorway, holding an umbrella dripping with rainwater. His hair was damp, and his expression was sheepish. "I thought you could use an extra set of hands," he said, holding up a bag of groceries. "Linda mentioned you were running low on supplies." Mia glanced at the bag, then back at Ethan. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said simply, "but I wanted to." Without waiting for a response, he set the bag on the counter and began unpacking its contents. Fresh produce, pasta, rice, and other essentials. Mia watched him silently, her emotions conflicted. This wasn't the Ethan she remembered from their marriage, the man who had been too consumed by work to notice the small, everyday struggles of their family life. This Ethan was present, thoughtful, and willing to help without being asked. As they worked side by side to prepare the meal, their conversation was minimal, but not uncomfortable. Ethan occasionally stole glances at Mia, marveling at her resilience and strength. She carried herself with a quiet determination that he hadn't fully appreciated during their time together. "Do you ever get a break?" he asked after a while, his tone light but curious. Mia let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "Not really. The shelter keeps me busy and the kids keep me busier." "You've always been incredible with them," Ethan said, his voice filled with admiration. "I don't know how you do it." Mia's hands paused as she stirred a pot on the stove. "Because I have to," she said quietly. "They're my world. No matter how hard things get, I have to keep going for them." Ethan nodded, his expression serious. "I want to help lighten that load, Mia. Not just here at the shelter, but with Sophia and Max. I know I can't undo the past, but I can be here now." Mia turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "Do you mean that? Or is this just another phase?" "I mean it," Ethan said firmly. "Every word. I've made so many mistakes, but I'm not the man I was. I want to be someone you and the kids can rely on." Mia's heart ached at his sincerity, but the fear of being let down again held her back. "Actions speak louder than words," she said, echoing the sentiment she had shared before. "I know," Ethan replied. "That's why I'm not going anywhere." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of Max's laughter as he ran into the kitchen, followed closely by Sophia. They were chasing each other, their giggles filling the room with warmth. Mia's stern expression softened as she watched her children, and Ethan's heart swelled with love and regret. "Daddy, look," Max said, holding up a crayon drawing of their family. Mia, Ethan, Sophia, Max, and even a small dog that didn't exist in real life. Ethan crouched down to Max's level, studying the drawing with genuine admiration. "This is amazing, buddy. You're a great artist." Max beamed with pride, and Sophia chimed in. "I helped him color it." Mia watched the interaction from the sidelines, her emotions a whirlwind. Seeing Ethan with the kids brought back memories of happier times, but it also reminded her of the pain she'd endured when he wasn't there. Yet, in this moment, she couldn't deny that he was making an effort, a genuine effort that seemed to come from the heart. After lunch, Ethan stayed to help clean up, much to Mia's surprise. He didn't rush or make excuses to leave, as he might have in the past. Instead, he stayed until the last dish was washed, and the kitchen was spotless. "Thank you," Mia said as he dried his hands on a towel. Her tone was softer than before, her gratitude genuine. Ethan met her gaze, a small smile playing on his lips. Any time. Later that evening, as Mia tucked Sophia and Max into bed, she found herself reflecting on the day. Ethan's presence, once a source of pain, was beginning to feel less like an intrusion and more like a second chance. But trust wasn't something she could give freely. It had to be earned, one small step at a time. As she closed the door to the children's room, Mia leaned against the wall, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. She wanted to believe that Ethan had changed, that he could be the partner and father they needed. But the wounds of the past were still fresh, and the fear of being hurt again loomed large. In the quiet of the evening, Mia allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She didn't have all the answers, but for the first time she felt a glimmer of hope. A fragile, tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. The days that followed were a delicate balance of progress and hesitation. Ethan continued to involve himself in the shelter's activities and the children's lives. Each moment of laughter, shared meal, or heartfelt conversation chipped away at the barriers Mia had built. But the weight of their unresolved past hung heavy in the air, an unspoken tension neither had yet dared to fully address. One evening, after the children had fallen asleep and the shelter was quiet, Ethan approached Mia as she sat at the small desk in her room, going over paperwork. The soft glow of the desk lamp illuminated her features, and for a moment he hesitated, unsure if he should disturb her. But he knew they couldn't move forward without confronting the shadows of their history. "Mia," he began, his voice low and hesitant. "Can we talk?" She looked up, her pen pausing mid-sentence. The exhaustion in her eyes was evident, but so was the guarded curiosity. "About what?" "About us," he said, stepping closer but keeping a respectful distance. "About everything that happened." Mia sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I'm not sure what there is to say, Ethan. We both know how things ended." "I know," he replied, "but I've been thinking a lot about what I did, what I didn't do, and I need you to hear me out." She gestured to the chair across from her, and Ethan sat down, the desk serving as both a barrier and a bridge between them. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I put work above you and the kids. I thought providing financially was enough, that success in the office meant success at home. But I was blind, Mia. I didn't see how much I was failing you, failing us." Mia's eyes flickered with a mixture of sadness and anger. "You didn't just fail, Ethan. You abandoned us. Every late night, every missed dinner, every broken promise. I was left to pick up the pieces while you chased after something that never seemed to be enough." Her words cut deep, but Ethan didn't flinch. He nodded, accepting her anger as justified. "You're right. I let you down in ways I can never undo. But losing you, losing our family, it showed me how wrong I was. I thought I was giving you security, but all I gave you was loneliness." Mia's voice softened, though her pain was still evident. "Do you know what it's like to feel invisible in your own marriage? To watch the person you love drift further and further away, no matter how hard you try to reach them?" Ethan swallowed hard, guilt tightening in his chest. "I do now," he said quietly. "Every night since you left, I've felt the weight of that emptiness, and every time I see you with Sophia and Max, I realize just how much I missed, how much I threw away." The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of their shared pain palpable. Mia's fingers traced the edge of a file on the desk, her gaze distant. "I used to believe in you," she said softly. "I believed in us. But after everything, I don't know if I can trust you again." "I understand," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the ache in his heart. "And I don't expect forgiveness overnight. But I'm here, Mia. I'm here for the long haul, and I'll do whatever it takes to prove that I've changed." Mia looked at him then, her eyes searching his for any trace of insincerity. What she saw was a man stripped of his pride, laying bare his regrets and hopes. It wasn't the confident, polished CEO she had married. It was someone humbled by his mistakes and determined to make amends. "I need time," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Time to figure out if I can believe in you again." Ethan nodded, his expression earnest. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." In the days that followed, Ethan continued to show his commitment not just with words but with actions. He spent mornings helping at the shelter, afternoons playing with the children, and evenings quietly supporting Mia in any way he could. He didn't push, didn't demand. He simply showed up, day after day. For Mia, the journey was far from easy. The scars of their past couldn't be erased with simple gestures, and her heart still carried the weight of betrayal. But slowly, cautiously, she began to see glimpses of the man Ethan was becoming, a man who seemed genuinely determined to rebuild what they had lost. One evening, as they sat on the shelter's porch watching the sunset, Mia turned to Ethan. "Why now?" she asked, her tone curious rather than accusatory. "Why did it take losing everything for you to see what mattered?" Ethan sighed, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Because I was too caught up in my own world to see what I had until it was gone. Losing you, Mia, it shattered me, but it also woke me up. I don't want to be that man anymore. I want to be better for you, for the kids, for myself." Mia studied him for a long moment, her heart warring between hope and caution. "I want to believe you, Ethan, but trust takes time. And I'll give you all the time you need," he promised. "I'll keep showing up every day until I've earned it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Mia allowed herself a small flicker of hope. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way forward together. Ethan's presence became a constant in Mia's life, but it was the consistency of his actions that began to chip away at the walls she had carefully built around her heart. He didn't just make grand promises. He followed through on every word he spoke, proving with each passing day that he was there for the long haul. Ethan threw himself into the shelter's activities, not out of obligation, but with genuine intent. He volunteered with a dedication that surprised everyone, including Mia. Whether it was fixing broken furniture, organizing donation drives, or tutoring the children, Ethan approached each task with the humility and focus of a man determined to make a difference. His transformation didn't go unnoticed, and slowly, the shelter staff and residents began to warm to him. Mia, however, was still cautious. She couldn't deny that Ethan was trying, truly trying, but trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. Every time she saw him laughing with Sophia and Max or patiently helping a resident, her heart softened a little, but the fear of being hurt again lingered in the back of her mind. One afternoon, as Mia sorted through donation records in her office, Ethan knocked on the doorframe. He was holding a tray with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Thought you could use a break," he said, stepping inside. Mia glanced up, her lips twitching into a reluctant smile. "You've been bringing me a lot of coffee lately. Trying to butter me up?" "Maybe," Ethan admitted with a small grin. "But mostly I just want to make your day a little easier." She accepted the cup, wrapping her hands around its warmth. "Thank you." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the hum of the shelter's activities filtering in from the hallway. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his tone earnest. "About how I need to prove myself, not just to you, but to the kids." Mia set her cup down, her expression guarded. And I want to do more," he said. "I've been looking into starting a scholarship fund for the children here, something to give them a chance at a brighter future." Mia's eyes widened in surprise. "That's a big step." "I know," Ethan said, meeting her gaze, "but it's something I can do. I've spent so much of my life focused on building my company, on chasing profits. It's time I used those resources to help people, starting with the shelter." Mia studied him, searching his face for any hint of ulterior motives, but all she saw was sincerity and a genuine desire to make amends. "That's a wonderful idea," she said softly. "The children here could really benefit from something like that." Ethan's relief was evident. "I'll handle all the logistics, of course. I just wanted your blessing before moving forward." Mia nodded, a small smile breaking through her guarded expression. "You have it." The scholarship fund became a turning point, not just for the shelter but for Ethan and Mia's relationship. Ethan poured his energy into the project, working closely with Mia to ensure it aligned with the shelter's mission. They spent long hours brainstorming ideas, reviewing applications, and meeting with potential donors. The more time they spent together, the more Mia found herself seeing the man she had once loved, the man she thought she had lost forever. But it wasn't just the big gestures that made a difference. It was the small, everyday moments that began to rebuild the trust between them. It was the way Ethan stayed up late to help Sophia with her homework, the way he played tag with Max in the shelter's courtyard, the way he always made sure Mia had a cup of coffee waiting for her in the morning. These little acts of kindness and consistency spoke louder than any apology ever could. One evening, after a particularly productive day at the shelter, Mia found Ethan sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. She hesitated for a moment before joining him, the cool evening air brushing against her skin. "Long day," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "Worth it," Ethan replied, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. "We made a lot of progress today." Mia nodded, a comfortable silence settling between them. For the first time in a long time, she felt at ease in his presence, the tension that had defined their interactions slowly fading away. "I see the way the kids look at you," she said after a while. "Sophia and Max, they adore you." Ethan's expression softened. "They're amazing kids. They remind me every day of what's truly important." Mia turned to him, her eyes searching his. "You've changed, Ethan." He met her gaze, his voice steady. "Because I had to. Losing you. Losing them. It was the wake-up call I didn't know I needed." Her heart ached at his words, a mix of hope and hesitation swirling within her. She wanted to believe him, to trust that this version of Ethan was real, but the scars of the past were still there, a reminder of the pain she had endured. "I'm not saying everything's perfect," Ethan continued. "I know I've got a long way to go, but I'm here, Mia, and I'm not going anywhere." Mia looked away, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "I want to believe you," she said softly, "but trust takes time." "I'm willing to wait," Ethan said, "for as long as it takes." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Mia allowed herself a small flicker of hope. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way forward together. The air in the shelter carried a mix of activity and warmth as the scholarship fund officially launched. Ethan's tireless efforts, coupled with Mia's leadership, had transformed the initiative into something far-reaching. It wasn't just a program, it was a lifeline for children who might otherwise have been left behind. Yet, amidst the success, the unresolved tension between Ethan and Mia lingered in the background. Ethan knew the time had come to confront the past head-on. He had spent weeks showing Mia through his actions that he was a changed man, but words were still necessary. Words that could heal old wounds and open the door to a fresh start. One evening, after the children were asleep and the shelter had quieted, Ethan found Mia in the small garden she often retreated to for solitude. She was sitting on a weathered bench, her hands cradling a steaming cup of tea. The glow of the garden lights reflected off her face, highlighting her thoughtful expression. "Mind if I join you?" Ethan asked, his voice gentle. Mia looked up, surprised but not displeased. "Sure," she said, gesturing to the empty spot beside her. He sat down, the crisp night air brushing against them. For a moment, neither spoke, the hum of crickets filling the silence. Then Ethan took a deep breath. "Mia," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've been wanting to say this for a long time. I need to apologize, not just for how things ended between us, but for everything I put you through." She turned to him, her eyes guarded but curious. "Go on." Ethan's gaze dropped to his hands, which were clasped tightly together. "I thought I was doing the right thing by prioritizing my career, by chasing success. I convinced myself it was all for us. But I see now that it wasn't. It was about me, my ego, my ambition. And in the process, I lost sight of what truly mattered." Mia's expression softened, but she remained silent, letting him continue. "When you told me you felt invisible, I should have listened. When you needed my support, I should have been there. But instead, I let my own fears and insecurities get in the way. And when you walked away, I blamed you instead of looking at my own actions." His voice broke slightly, but he pushed on. "I don't blame you for leaving. I would have left me too. But losing you and the kids was the wake-up call I needed. It forced me to look in the mirror and see the person I had become, and it wasn't someone I was proud of." Mia set her cup down, her hands resting in her lap. "You've done a lot to show that you've changed," she said quietly. "But an apology isn't just about words, Ethan. It's about accountability." "I know," he said, "and that's why I'm not asking for forgiveness, not yet. I know it's something I have to earn, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Mia studied him, her eyes searching for any hint of insincerity, but all she saw was a man laying his heart bare, stripped of the arrogance and bravado that had once defined him. "Do you mean that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "With every fiber of my being," Ethan replied. "I want to be a better man, not just for you and the kids, but for myself. And I want to be the father they deserve, the partner you deserve." Her heart wavered, the weight of his words sinking in. She had spent so long protecting herself, guarding her heart against the possibility of being hurt again. But sitting there, under the soft glow of the garden lights, she felt a flicker of hope, a tentative belief that maybe, just maybe, Ethan was sincere. "I don't know if I'm ready to trust you completely," she admitted, "but I can see that you're trying, and that means something." Ethan nodded, his expression a mix of relief and determination. "That's all I could ever ask for." They sat in silence for a while, the distance between them feeling a little less insurmountable. Finally, Mia spoke. "The scholarship fund, it's a wonderful thing you're doing," she said. "But it's not just about the money. It's about the impact you're making on these kids' lives." "That's thanks to you," Ethan said. "You've built something incredible here, Mia. I'm just lucky to be a part of it." She smiled, a small but genuine expression that lit up her face. "Maybe you're not so bad after all." Ethan chuckled, the sound light and genuine. "I'll take that as a win." As the night wore on, they talked about the future, not just of the shelter but of their family. For the first time in a long time, they allowed themselves to dream of what could be. Their conversation filled with tentative hope and cautious optimism. When they finally parted ways, Ethan felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start, a new beginning rooted in honesty, humility, and a shared commitment to building something better. And for Mia, it was a reminder that even the most broken relationships could be mended, piece by piece, if both parties were willing to try. As she climbed into bed that night, she found herself smiling. A small, tentative smile, but one filled with hope for the future. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. Your support means the world. Support means the world. Support means the world.